My name is Alex Dolphin and welcome back to another episode of Ex Ante. Today we're going to discuss a case called Faber versus Sweet Style Mfg Corporation. This case was asserted in the New York Supreme Court in the year of 1963. Let's go ahead and jump into the facts of the case. Faber is our plaintiff. He's a purchaser of real property. Our defendant is Sweet Style, and they're the seller of real property. Plaintiff was generally an average guy. He was very conservative, very frugal, the court says. And in his middle ages, he began to suffer from a disorder called manic depressive disorder. The court refers to it as manic depressive psychosis, which I don't think is appropriate anymore. So I'll call it manic depressive disorder. Faber, this was evident in the way he began to act, right? Used to be a frugal guy, maybe just an average dad who tried to save some money. He now bought 3 luxury cars. He was spending money out the wazoo. He was purchasing tons of stuff. And he wasn't acting normally. And his wife said that as well. So he did have a psychiatrist at the time. He was seeing a psychiatrist. But he felt like he was good. He felt like he was doing fine. So he went and purchased this piece of property from our defendant. He purchased this property with the idea of creating a drugstore and a convenience store on the property. So he purchases this property, he enters into a contract, he gives them 10% earnest money on the property. He hires contractors to begin building, he hires an architect, he begins doing some work on the land before the contract has completely closed. But shortly after entering into the contract, he went to go see his psychiatrist. And he was telling he went to go see his psychiatrist because he was worried about his wife. His wife was trying to say like, hey, honey, you're acting a little bit irrational. Like, let's reel it back in. We don't need to make all these crazy purchases. We don't need to buy this property. Let's just calm down for a little bit. And he was concerned. He said his wife was trying to hold him back. So he went into the psychiatrist. The psychiatrist evaluates him and says, yeah, you're not doing well, man. We got to get you into a mental hospital. So the psychiatrist admits him into the mental hospital. While our plaintiff is in the mental hospital, he sends an objection to the seller saying like, hey, I don't want to buy this property anymore. I want out of the contract. The seller files a counterclaim asking the court for specific performance. So they're saying, no, he entered into this. He should be forced to purchase this piece of property. So the question before the court, the issue is, how will the court determine if our plaintiff, in this case, the prospective purchaser of the property, was mentally incompetent to enter into a contract? Because that's what our plaintiff is claiming. He's saying, I was mentally incompetent at the time I entered into the contract. I didn't really know what I was doing. I wasn't in my right mind, and this contract should be void because of that. So the court considers some evidence. They consider his activity. They have 3 experts speak before the court as to his mental fitness. So they have his psychiatrist, another psychiatrist that he had worked to, and then just another third random psychiatrist. The 2 psychiatrists that had worked with him said, yeah, Mr. Faber has an issue with manic depressive disorder. This contract, when he entered into it, he didn't really know what he was doing. They're just basically saying he didn't know what was going on. He couldn't have made a reasonable, clear-minded decision at that point in time. Whereas the other expert, who hadn't treated him, said, you know what, I think he could have made a clear decision at that point in time. So the court has to decide, well, which doctor's testimony are we going to take as valid, because they're conflicting between the 2. So the court ultimately says there's a test that we're going to use if we're going to consider a plaintiff or someone who's in a contract, if we're going to say that they were mentally incompetent to enter into that contract at the time they did. They say there's 3 factors. 1, the testimony of the claimed incompetent, so the testimony of the plaintiff in this case. They say that that's kind of a hard factor to fulfill, right? Because if they're not mentally stable or mentally able to enter into contract, it might be hard to get some consistent and coherent testimony out of them. So number 2 would be the testimony of the psychiatrist. So they do take that into order. And then 3, the behavior of the claimed incompetent as detailed in the testimony of others. So basically they're just saying, and then we're just going to look at the behavior as judges. We're just going to judge the behavior, and then we'll decide if he was incompetent. The court ultimately comes down a little bit further in the decision, and they say that that is the factor that's most important. The court is going to be given the most deference to consider when someone is mentally incompetent, so as to not be able to enter into a contract. So the court ultimately does say that our plaintiff, Mr. Faber, was not capable, not coherent enough to enter into a contract when he did, and for that reason, they're going to claim the contract is void. So if that's the case, I think it's an interesting one because we're dealing with something that is so subjective. Mental illness, mental ailments, on a certain level are subjective. I think most of society says that they are objectively true, but the experience of that individual is certainly subjective. And we're trying to basically play mind reading as the court, and the court is, and trying to read the mind of the plaintiff and see where he was at. It's difficult to do. It does give deference to the court and allows them to, look at the fact scenario and say, he was competent, he wasn't mentally competent. So it's good in the fact that we're giving judges power to deliberate, but it's likely bad in the fact that there's going to be scenarios where individuals weren't really mentally competent enough to enter into a contract, but the court is going to say that they were competent enough, because it's just we're dealing with someone out on the outside looking in, right? I think that's necessary. I don't think there's any way really around that. It might be better if we just said we're going to enforce all contracts, and then mentally unstable people, like our plaintiff in this case, maybe they just would not enter into contracts if they were, knew that there's a potential that they're mentally unstable. They're not going to enter into a contract because they know that all contracts are binding. This gray area does allow for some ambiguity and for people to argue their case in front of the judge, which I think is also agreeable in a sense, but definitely does take some of the weight out of contracts when someone can claim that it's void because they weren't mentally competent, when, to the seller of this property, Mr. Faber might have just totally appeared, to have been mentally competent at the time he entered into the contract. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you'd like to see more, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye-bye.